Good evening. Welcome to a very different edition of The Project. The panel that was meant to be with you tonight will be here shortly and normal service will resume. But up first, a commercial-free discussion with the Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison. Welcome to The Project.
G'day, Waleed.
I'm going to do something I never thought I would do.
Yeah.
Particularly in an interview with a politician.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you set the agenda to begin with. What do you want to say?
It has been an extraordinary few days, and you've just got back from New Zealand and meeting with Prime Minister Ardern, and you would obviously have a keen sense of what it's like on the ground there. These events are tectonic. They affect us all. On Friday, I was in Sydney when the first news came through, and at that stage it was just very unclear. We didn't really know what was happening, who it was, except for where it was happening, obviously, and that was deeply distressing in the mosque. And then as the news came through and you get the briefings and it became crystal clear what had occurred, there was just a numbness. And we all experienced it. We all experienced it. The news came. And then the horror came of the hatred and the ugliness that had led to this. And I have a very forthright way, as you know and others know. And my first response, apart from getting in contact with Prime Minister Ardern to express our deepest sympathies and to say kia kaha, as you know, means stay strong, to our New Zealand whānau, it was to let all Australians know what had happened, to call it as it happened and what it was, and to seek to bind us up. Now, in the same way, both as Prime Ministers in New Zealand and Australia, my first reaching out was to the Muslim community, and the following day I was able to meet with the Imams Council, and I had many friends there. And basically we hugged when we met, my friends and I. And then we spoke honestly about what had occurred and how people were feeling in the Islamic community and the feelings that were going right throughout the country. But what really impressed me was the leadership was focused on two things. They were focused on reaching out to those in New Zealand and the practical things, burials, observance of the rights and so on, and how that could be done and how they could assist. But the other one was to get close to their own community and help them to try and absorb and understand. And so all of us over the last 4 or 5 days have sought to come to terms with this, and it's been a very emotional time. And it's reminded us, I think, of the fragility of life and how quickly hate and violence can take the most important things from us. So as I said on that first Friday night to Australians, just hug each other tonight. And I think we need to keep hugging each other.
It's an attack that has kind of, I was going to say reset, but it's at least caused pause. Because if I can put it in such crude terms, the community that for 15 years, 18 years, has been framed in the public imagination as a perpetrator suddenly became the victim. And the reverse was also true. And so we're now having a lot of discussions about Islamophobia in Australia, as well as, of course, in New Zealand and around the world.
Sure.
Does Australia have an Islamophobia problem?
I don't know if Australians understand Islam very well, and that can often lead to fear of things you don't understand. So, by definition, that's what it leads to. But that doesn't always translate into extremism, just like any view doesn't necessarily flow into extremism. As Malcolm used to say, domestic violence starts with disrespect of women.
But not all disrespect.
But not all disrespect of women leads to violence.
And
I think that's true.
Yeah, but when I ask about Islamophobia, I don't mean just people don't understand and they're a bit apprehensive. I mean effectively an ideologised form of
there's no doubt that that exists in Australia. There's no doubt that that exists in Australia. But there's no doubt that so many forms of hatred and stereotyping goes on in the Australian community.
Right, so how big a problem is this, do you think?
Well, we have been tracking through our agencies this form of extremism. Now, people have used different words. I've said right-wing extreme, and others said white supremacist or white separatist. It all means the same thing, ultimately, at the end of the day. It's just where a view gets taken to an absolute extreme when you're talking about supremacists and separatists. Any community can take itself to a point with some where they engage in a form of fundamentalism extreme, which is a danger to innocence. Now, this is true in the Christian community. It's true in the Hindu community. in other countries, I should stress. I mean, we all know of violence that has occurred there. Buddhist communities, Muslim communities, where in any of these communities you allow fundamentalism and extremism to take hold, and as a community you don't guard against that, then this is where it ends. And the great victim is innocence. The great victim is peace.
Okay, well, let me be perhaps more focused in the way I want to ask this. Does the coalition have a problem with Islamophobia?
No, I don't believe the Liberal Party does, and I don't believe... I can't speak for the National Party, I'll let the leader of the National Party, but I don't think...
No, you can, though. You are Prime Minister, and it is your coalition.
No, I don't,
so...
no, I don't believe so. No, I don't believe so. And, but I'll speak for myself.
Well, no, I get you all need to speak for yourself, but it is important to focus on the
I
coalition
think it's
generally.
important for all of us. And today's Harmony Day.
Yeah.
And Harmony Day is an opportunity for us, I think, to understand better difference. Well, you know, the classic wisdom of seek first to understand before you're understood. And I think that is one of the important lessons of Harmony Day. The problem I have is that we don't do a lot of seeking to understand first. We often jump to conclusions about others. In politics, I think it's important that we have disagreements, but I wish we could disagree better. And I wish if we did disagree, that we always didn't leap to assuming other people's motives. And I think that's important. You know, you and I can disagree, and look, you've interviewed me before when you're on radio and years ago, and we've disagreed. But I think it's really important in Australia, if we want a better society, that we've got to disagree better and respect each other more and the motives of others and not leap to prejudiced conclusions about others.
Sure, OK. So let me just run through some things and perhaps you can help me understand better or explain motives or whatever it might be. When you have people in your coalition, George Christensen speaking at a Reclaim Australia rally, appearing on an alt-right podcast, speaking at a Q Society event where horrible things are said about multiple minorities, when you've got a former Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, saying that Islamophobia never killed anybody, when actually it already had. It's not just that it was true at the time, it isn't now, it wasn't true at the time. And suggested that when Muslim leaders condemn terrorism, they don't really mean it. When you have Peter Dutton suggesting that Lebanese immigration in the 70s was a mistake, or that mistakes were made around it. When you have him talking about Mehreen Faruqi, who's a Muslim senator who's a part of the Greens, being as bad as Fraser Anning after the Christchurch attacks. When you have multiple, I think 7, coalition senators shaking Fraser Anning's hand after he gives the final solution speech in Parliament. And when you have reports in a newspaper like The Australian that it got to the point that the head of ASIO, Duncan Lewis, contacted members of the Liberal Party and of the coalition to warn them about the way they were talking about Islam. When I aggregate all that, and there are other examples I could give, when I aggregate all that, is there something that does need to be confronted within your own party henceforth?
Well, as leader, it's my job to ensure that the tone I set is the right tone. And the tone I've said, you can see from my experience, Waleed. You may not be familiar with my experience in this area. Let me tell you the story. When I came into the Parliament in 2007, in the seat of Cook in the southern part of Sydney, that was not long after the riots that were there and the revenge attacks that took place soon after. So I know what it looks like in a community when things turn very bad and the cycle of violence is allowed to perpetuate. My predecessor, Bruce Baird, responded to this, working with a wonderful bloke who's become a dear friend of mine, Jamal Reefi, and brought the communities together by taking a whole group of young Muslim people in southwestern Sydney, and they trained to be lifesavers, particularly at the North Cronulla Surf Club. Now, when I came into Parliament, we wanted to keep this program of bringing those two parts of Sydney together. And Jason Clare, today a good friend of mine, a Labor member for that part of Sydney, we decided to take young people from both of our communities and walk the Kokoda track together to help us understand, and particularly our younger people, these two different types of cultures, or what I described as very different Australian experiences. Now, since that, Jason and I did it 2 more times. We walked the Sendak and Death March together with a similar group, and included an Indigenous group, actually, from Rob Oakeshott's electorate at the time. We did the same thing in the Black Cat Track in 2013 and had some great young Muslim women there, some of whom were working for the AFP. And again in 2015, I wasn't able to go on that one, but helped organise the one we took to Gallipoli. Now, over that period of time, it has been my work in Parliament to try and build these communities together, not apart. Now, that's my form, Waleed. And my form is to take that experience into my own party as leader.
But is that happening? And especially when, with that track record, I'm trying to draw you on whether or not that track record's a problem. And
the best way for me to address any problem is to lead by my own example.
Okay, sure.
And I've just
is
set
that
out
track
what that
record a
example.
problem in the first place?
Well, there are a number of cases there you've talked about where, you know, I've made comments on those at the time. I think there are other few ones on there that I'm not sure you're representing in the right light.
Sure, OK.
I'll give you a good example. The comments you've referred to in relation to Peter, when he talked about the immigration period in the 1980s. Now, that was a humanitarian intake where there weren't the normal assessments that were done, that would be done now. And, you know, there were things that were done at that time which the Immigration Department would tell you today that they would have done them differently if they'd had the lessons of that period
Only
of time.
in relation to the Lebanese community?
No, they learned lessons from all sorts of areas of intake.
So why single out the Lebanese community in that context?
Well, all I'm simply saying, Waleed, is that what Peter was explaining were some lessons that were learnt during a period of what was a fairly tumultuous time in the world.
But he singled out the Lebanese community.
If your question to me, Waleed, is this, which I believe it is do I think that every single statement by any single member of the Liberal Party has always been consistent?
That's not my question.
Well, maybe you want to rephrase it.
No, I'll just re-ask it. Does your party and your coalition have a problem of Islamophobia, given that track record of behaviour?
Well, I already said to you before that, no, I don't think the party has a problem. I don't think the Liberal Party as a total group has that problem. No, I don't. And I don't think the National Party does either. I mean, our party is made up of a lot of individuals. And in our parties, individuals have a lot more freedom to say what they think than a lot of other parties. And it is not for the party to answer for every single member on every single occasion.
What about, though, if they are speaking at a Reclaim Australia rally?
Well, I didn't support that at the time.
Yeah, but it's a problem, isn't it?
He was a backbencher and remains a backbencher in the government.
And an endorsed candidate, I assume, in
by
the
LNP. But again, if we want to get bogged down in this, or do we want to move to how we actually make things better? In terms of the individuals, I talk to all of my members. And as I say, I try and lead by example. And my example has been to work with the Muslim community very, very deeply. One of the hardest things I ever did as a politician, it was when Jamal rang me. There was a family, the Elba family. I don't know, you remember the story about the four brothers? Jamal rang me when I was Immigration Minister and said, these four boys have left. We think they've gone to the Middle East to fight for ISIS. And he said, is there anything you can do to try and prevent them from getting there? I immediately got in touch with the Australian, well, it was then still the Department of Immigration and Border Protection, but sadly they'd already gone through clearances and they'd already gone through Southeast Asia. Those boys are all dead today, the best of our knowledge. We know 2 are dead. But Jamal rang me and said, I'd like you to come and meet their parents. And so I did. And I sat down with them and said I was also there with Tony Abbott's knowledge, who was the Prime Minister at the time. And I just sat there and listened to their grief. So I have a keen understanding of what terrorist recruiters can do to destroy families. And innocence, again, is the victim. It doesn't matter whether you're Muslim, it doesn't matter whether you're Christian. When evil comes, it robs and it steals. And so I think the answer is not for us to retreat into tribes and try and herd people into tribes and say, well, you've got this problem, you've got that problem. I think the answer is to do what I said before. And let's try and better understand where we're all coming from and not try to line people up on teams.
I appreciate that sentiment. I think talking about the past is important because the only way that you can move forward, reset at a moment like this, is if you acknowledge things that have happened in the past that are a problem and that need fixing.
Well, let me talk about...
Let's look at the future. You want to look at the future?
You said Peter also was talking about the comment made by the Queen's Senator. That comment was suggesting that I and Peter Dutton were responsible for the terrorist attacks in Christchurch. Now, would you find that a reasonable statement to make?
Would I equate it with what Fraser Anning had to say? Would you?
that I personally...
Did she say literally that you personally
That was the clear implication, Waleed.
Okay, we're going to get into implication.
No, but no,
you're comparing it to the direct
I'm sorry,
statements
you raised
of
the
Fraser
issue,
Anning.
so let me address it.
No,
Do you think it's reasonable
trying to answer your
for
question.
any senator to say that the Prime Minister and the Minister for Home Affairs was responsible for the terror attacks in Christchurch?
And no, I don't.
Well,
but you're not asking.
I think it's reasonable that Peter would have found that quite offensive.
Yes.
And in the heat of the moment, when people are upset...
So it was a heat of the moment thing. Is that what you're saying?
Waleed, the other night, you were very emotional, and I'm sure you may have said some things about me that, based on our conversation since, that you think may have been a bit over the top about my own motives when it comes to these issues. I understand
say that again? Well, you think I said what?
Yeah. Well, you're on the other night, and as we discussed today, you implied that Muslims couldn't feel safe because they had a Prime Minister who somehow had been prejudiced against them. And I don't believe that's true. I don't think you believe that's true
I don't know, and that wasn't the implication that I was making. But
people say things sometimes...
But Prime Minister, let me ask this question. Since you raise it, we'll come to that report, that Shadow Cabinet report. You say that this never happened. You've called it a smear and a lie. Who's lying?
Well, I can only say anyone who may have talked to a journalist to smear me in that way.
Okay.
Because there's been a number of members who were at that meeting who have gone on the record to support the fact that that did not happen.
Well, there were some members who went on the record, some of whom weren't at the meeting. There are other members who've been...
Philip Ruddock was there, and he said it didn't happen.
No, my understanding...
Tony Abbott was there, and he said it didn't happen. David Johnson was there, and he said it didn't happen.
Prime Minister,
I was there, and I say it didn't happen.
With respect, Philip Ruddock didn't say it didn't happen. He said he couldn't recall. I've looked high and low. No, but it's an important difference, isn't it?
Well,
you talk about people who have been on the record. Well, there is at least one of those people on the record saying that it did happen, that being Andrew Robb. You have multiple journalists reporting from multiple sources.
Hang on. I have to stop you there.
You can get to that point in a second. You have multiple
journalists. You have said that Andrew Robb said something that he didn't.
I've read it with my own eyes today.
No, what Andrew...
I'll let you finish.
I apologise.
You have multiple reporters reporting from multiple sources that it happened, and you have one on the record saying the same.
No, that's not true, Waleed. That is not true. What is suggested is that I said that we should exploit concerns about Islam in the community to our political advantage.
Exploit, I think, is your word.
Let
me ask it this way.
And Andrew Robb...
Let me ask you this way. What did you say?
Do you mind if I finish the...
What did you say?
I'm sorry. No, Andrew Robb did not say that I did that.
No, Andrew Robb said that you raised the issue.
Yeah, and I was the Shadow Immigration Minister at the time, and I was very concerned about these issues and the way people were feeling in the community.
So when you raised those issues in that meeting, what did you say about them?
Well, I was concerned that we needed to address them, which is what I've been doing inside and outside of the Parliament for the last 10 years of my life.
Address those concerns?
Yes, to lower them.
So what your argument was in that Shadow Cabinet meeting was...
Yeah, I was acknowledging that there were these fears in the community and that we had to address them, not exploit them, actually seek to try and address them.
So the reports then of other people in the Shadow Cabinet concluding that discussion by saying we have a non-discriminatory immigration policy and that's the way that it should stay.
Yeah, that has always been my view.
Right. But that...
I have championed that view as a minister, as a member of Parliament for my entire public life.
Why would that need to be said, though, if the discussion in the meeting was about how can we dampen down community concerns about Muslims?
Because I think we have responsibilities, as you were just asking me to do, that where we are concerned that people would have fears about these things, that we would seek to alleviate those fears.
And this was a meeting about campaign strategy, and you were saying...
No, this was just a Shadow Cabinet meeting.
OK, and so at the
end of that... Talking about policy.
At the end of that conversation, somebody had to say, it was reported as Julie Bishop, who I understand was chairing that meeting, said, we're drawing a line under this because we have a non-discriminatory immigration
Yes,
policy.
that's my view, and that was my view.
But
it's always been my
I
view.
still don't understand why she would need to say that if that wasn't a matter of controversy within the meeting.
No, what I'm saying is that I was concerned about those fears in the community, and that it's always been my practice, as I've demonstrated to you, outside the parliament and inside the parliament, to seek to address those. Why else do you think I would have been working like I have, as I explained to you before? Why do you think I would be? That's been my experience. This is why on Saturday, after these horrendous attacks, and I went to speak to those at the Lakemba Mosque, I was greeted with hugs and tears. Do you think that is the act of someone who hasn't been working closely with the Islamic community in Sydney for a long time?
I'm not accusing you of not having ever worked with the Muslim community in Sydney or even not having done it for a long time.
Well, can't you see that what you're suggesting is at complete odds
Prime Minister, I'm not,
with the experience
Prime Minister, I'm not
that
suggesting,
I have been involved
Prime
with
Minister,
over my last 10 years of public life? Doesn't it sound odd that report would
Prime Minister,
jar
I'm
with
asking
that?
you a question about a report that is sourced from multiple people, that was reported by multiple journalists, by which all those journalists stand.
Two unnamed sources who have never gone public.
Well, one of them has. And I've asked you... we've had this discussion already.
No, Andrew Watt was not one of those
Prime Minister,
sources.
I've asked you to explain it.
And I have.
You've provided your explanation. Fine. People will just draw their own conclusions on that. I have no problem with that. Can I come...
But Waleed, let me just say it for
I've
the
got to
record.
ask you this question, because you wanted to look forward and you wanted to talk about the tone...
I want to rule a line onto this issue. It never happened. I've always been deeply concerned about attitudes towards people of Muslim faith in our community. I entered the parliament after one of the most horrible scenes that we've seen on our own soil on this issue, and set about immediately to try and bring communities together.
Okay.
And I've always acted consistently with that in shadow cabinet, in the cabinet, by my policy decisions as ministers, and in my own personal conduct. And so such a report is so at odds with my experience and actions that I think that speaks for itself.
Does acting in accordance with those beliefs mean that you will be, henceforth, this is about the future and about the tone you want to set as a leader, that you will be preferencing one nation last?
We're not going to do any preference deals with one nation.
Not a deal. Will you, on your how to vote cards, be putting one nation last?
Well, those matters are determined by the party when we know what the nominations are.
You have a very strong voice within that party.
Yeah, and we won't do any deals with one nation.
I'm not talking about a deal with one nation. I'm talking about a decision from your party to preference one nation, who, by the way, said that Islam was a disease that needed to be vaccinated. Will you be putting them last on your how to vote card?
What if Fraser Anning's running candidates?
Right. So if Fraser Anning's, you'll put one nation ahead of Fraser Anning.
Well, you tell me.
I'm just asking.
Well, this is the point, Waleed. I don't know who's going to nominate in the electorate.
Okay, let me rephrase.
In the electorate of Longman. No, well, you've raised the issue. In the electorate of Longman.
Let me rephrase, because I know what
Waleed,
I know the way you're.
Please let me answer one question.
No, because I will ask this question.
Okay.
Because this is going to get to the point.
I'm just trying to answer your questions. I was raising the issue.
Let me rephrase
the practical
it. Prime
issue
Minister,
of Longman.
I need to get through this question. Will you, at the very least, commit in every seat to putting them below the Labor Party and the Greens?
Well, I'm going to wait to see what all the nominations are. And in our party, those decisions are made by the party organisation. And I know the Labor Party wants me to do a preference deal with them, and I won't be doing a deal with the Labor Party or the Greens or anyone else.
None of this is
the
about
election, the
preference
nominations will be called, we'll see the candidates, and we will make our decisions at that time.
Prime Minister, why are you talking about preference deals? I'm not talking about a preference deal.
Well, I've just answered the question as to how we're going to conduct ourselves in relation to
But you're talking about a preference deal, which is not what I'm talking about.
No, I said we are going to make these decisions at the time nominations close, and then we'll apply those decisions at that time as a party organisation.
Do you think, particularly in the circumstances that we face right now, that the Liberal Party and the National Party, where relevant, should be preferencing one nation below Labor and the Greens?
I said we're going to make that decision at the time of the nominations
closing. What do you think?
Well, you'll know when we make that decision at that time.
Do you have a view on it?
And I'll be consulting with my own party organisation. I won't be doing it through your program.
Why is it difficult? Why is it a difficult question?
Because I'm part of a party that has a process. And that party listens to a lot of people in its organisation who are members of our party. And that is a decision that is actually taken in each state and territory division of the Liberal Party by the president of that party as part of their preferences committee, on which I will have representatives. And that is respecting our process.
But there is also the question of leadership, which you've raised. Would
And
it
I'll
not
be
be a strong
exercising
act
that
of
at that
leadership?
time.
Would it not be a strong act of leadership to say right now that you shouldn't be preferencing One Nation ahead of Labor and the Greens? That it would be an uncontroversial thing.
No, all
for
I'm
you to say
saying at
that.
this stage is that we will never do a preference deal with One Nation, and that we will settle those matters at the time of nominations closing when we know who all the candidates are.
So does that mean it is possible that you will be preferencing One Nation ahead of Labor and the Greens?
No, it just means what I just said.
No, it wasn't clear to me on that point, sorry.
No, well,
does that mean that
we'll make
you
those
will,
decisions clear
it's possible,
at the time
you'll
of
be doing that?
nominations closing, Waleed.
Okay. On the question of immigration, and here I'm not talking about the policy of immigration so much as the rhetoric of immigration and the discourse around immigration. Do you think it's a problem when we talk about asylum seekers in particular through the prism of the possibility of them being rapists, of being murderers, of being pedophiles, this kind of quasi-Trumpian language, in his case applied to Mexicans?
Well, that's only relevant if in the cases that we're talking about, that is the what is known about the actual individuals who may be subject to transfers. That was the topic of that debate at the time, and that's what was said.
Right.
Should we ignore the fact that if there are persons who do have those records or for whom those issues are present, that we should ignore that?
The question...
Should we? It's like it's taboo. You're not allowed to mention it. Or?
There are multiple points to this. One of which is that it was warning that these people would be in Australia as though they would be in the community, and the bill in question never did that. I suppose it's about whether or not...
Well, the bill
you think...
actually could do that if they were put in community detention in metropolitan parts of the city. That's
the bill made
exactly
clear that they could be denied on those grounds, and so they wouldn't get into the country in the first place.
I'm sorry,
But
Waleed, the bill didn't do that. The bill didn't do that. And so for those for whom that is a particular issue and there is intelligence or information that relates to those individuals who have that as an issue for us, well, of course we're going to take the necessary precautions.
we spoke to numerous people who were involved in drafting the bill. There seems to have been no advice that those people with those track records would be allowed into the country.
Well, I'm sorry, we're the government and we have to implement it, and we know that that's exactly what can happen and we can't resist it.
Right. So do you understand, though, that...
We're implementing that bill right now. It's not ours.
I understand. Do you understand,
so
though,
we're
that
taking the advice on how it has to be implemented, and we'll be doing
Do you
that.
understand, though, that when you frame the issue in that way, that creates an environment of prejudice, or do you think that's not what happens?
No, I think we're not going to sugarcoat to the public the implications of laws passing the Parliament. And, Waleed, it's important that you don't either.
No, I'm not in the process of doing anything
Well,
of the
in your
sort.
commentary on these things, all journalists, I think, have to be careful that they don't create a false impression of the risks that need to be managed.
I'm asking you a question about whether or not describing people...
Well, the only people who would describe like that were the people who you could make that description
I
of.
feel like it's very difficult to get through a sentence at the moment. The question really is about whether or not front-footing that description of these people, when there are so few of them in that category, and the categories that we were being warned about ended up being so vanishingly small once further questioning was applied to them,
Well,
that
actually,
creates...
We're talking about
That creates a
number.
prejudice.
No, Waleed, you've got to be honest with people. And if a bill that was put forward and supported by the Labor Party was going to be creating risks for managing the transfer of people into the community, then I'm not going to tell the Australian people that those risks don't exist. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There are real risks. There are very real risks. I mean, people used to accuse me of this when I was talking about what we needed to do to actually get our borders under control. And they used to accuse me of all sorts of motives. But I was right.
And how many people
It
were in
needed
this
to be
category?
stopped. My last advice of all of those of whom there were some serious concerns on character issues, I think it was over about 50.
No, 50 murderers, rapists and pedophiles.
Not only those, but all people who had character assessments.
How many murderers, rapists and pedophiles are we talking about?
They were actually all published.
How many?
We had people with character concerns of over 50 people, Waleed.
No, that's not what I asked. How many murderers,
Waleed,
rapists and pedophiles? No, it's an important question because that's
They were among those 50.
Among.
That's true.
2 among,
So how
3
many
among,
rapists...
50
No, well, let
among,
me put this
how
to you,
many?
Waleed. How many rapists and murderers should be transferred to the Australian community.
I would say none, which is what the authors of the bill contend.
And they were wrong.
But
they were wrong, Waleed.
But let me ask you the question, because if you say
there only needs to be one, Waleed. That's my answer.
And if the minister
there only needs to be one.
If the minister has a discretion to stop that person.
But they don't.
They do.
They do not, Waleed.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm the Prime Minister. I'm responsible for implementing it, and I have the full availability of the Attorney-General, the Attorney-General's Department, the Department of Home Affairs, and their advice to me is no, we don't have that power.
Okay.
So I don't know whose advice you're relying on, but I'm sorry, you don't know.
So because of that one person, is it one, by the way?
No, it's more than one.
Okay.
It's well over that.
Okay, can you give me that number? I'm actually interested to know it.
Well, I've already told you, there's almost 60 actually who are identified of having serious character concerns that in other circumstances we would never allow to be transferred to Australia. So that's enough for...
that's not the question I've asked.
No, well, I've asked you the same question. You're saying no rapists.
Murderers, rapists or pedophiles.
Yeah, they exist.
How many?
And they are there.
How many of those 60?
And those crimes have been committed actually in Papua New Guinea.
How many of those 60?
There are a number.
I know there's a number.
I don't have the number to hand, but this is getting into a semantic discussion. What I'm saying to you, Waleed, is this, though. Yeah. Don't sugarcoat this stuff. It doesn't excuse it.
I have no interest in sugarcoating.
Well, I'm afraid, mate, sometimes you could be accused of that.
Oh, is that what you're doing now?
Well, you're saying that there was no risk, Waleed.
I'm asking you...
And there was risk. And you say it didn't exist because the bill didn't allow for it. And I'm telling you that's wrong.
I'm saying...
And so I'm
saying the bill protected against that risk, and I'm not
honest with the Australian people
that.
about the risk.
Let me ask you one final area here. What needs to happen now, communally, and from the government? What does the government need to do? What leadership does the government need to show to lower the social temperature in Australia, do you think?
You mean particularly after Friday?
Yeah.
Well, exactly what I did do. First step, call this out for what it was. Next step, go and sit down with Muslim brothers and sisters that I know and express my deepest and sincerest condolences and talk about the issues we needed to manage straight away. On Sunday, I went to the Coptic church in Arncliffe in Sydney, a community no stranger to shootings in churches, who understands, probably more than most, how deeply these things can affect communities. And went there and spoke there, prayed there with my family. On Monday, I went to the Australian-Israel Chamber of Commerce here in Melbourne, and I gave a speech which talked about the need for Australians to see each other as individuals, not herded into particular groups. That we could actually respect each other and the motives that sit behind each and every individual and not make assumptions about people based on what other people have said, and that we needed to disagree better, not necessarily agree more, and that we didn't allow conflict in debate to become a sport and an entertainment, but that we're able to get behind that and actually have real community building initiatives, which are exactly the type of initiatives I announced on Wednesday of this week.
So I fully...
Initiatives like Together for Humanity, which we put 2.5 million... Initiatives like the one we announced today with Basher Hurley down there at Richmond at Punt Road. These types of programs which I have been supporting and my government has been funding for years now. That's what we need to do.
So I fully expect that when someone, one of your political opponents, behaves in a way that is contrary to the spirit of that you will censure them. I fully expect that. Do you think you will do it when it comes from within your own set of political allies?
Well, I have. So again, Waleed, look to the experience that I've laid out for you tonight. And don't prejudge me.
I'm not prejudging, I'm asking you the question.
Well,
will you henceforth...
That's my form, Waleed.
The next time...
I'm happy to call out people, as others have sought to call me out on things. I'm not shy about doing these sorts of things. I'm not shy about doing these sorts of things because I know what my values are and I know what I have done in my life to try and build these bridges between communities. When I became Prime Minister, I said I want to do 3 things. I wanted to keep the economy strong because if you don't have a job, you don't have a lot of choices. If the economy is not strong, you can't pay for services like hospitals and schools. I said I want to keep Australians safe And that wasn't just about strong borders and our defence forces. It was about the biggest ever plan for countering domestic violence in Australia's history at $328 million, which we announced just the other week. And I said I wanted to bring Australians together. Now, I have form on all these things, Waleed. And on bringing Australians together, I think you'll find it hard to find another member of Parliament who has not made at least the same effort that I have to build these bridges between these communities.
Prime Minister,
and I will continue to do that as Prime Minister each and every day because, you know, we've got to love all Australians. Doesn't matter what their background is, doesn't matter what their religion is, doesn't matter what their ethnicity is. We are the most successful multicultural country in the earth, the best immigration nation of any country in the earth. And that's my responsibility to make sure it stays that way, and that's my absolute commitment.
Prime Minister, I wish you all the best with that endeavour.
Well, I look forward to your support and helping me doing it.
Well, we'll certainly be watching and supporting, absolutely.
Thanks very much.
Where that does happen. Thank you very much. Time.
Ta.
Don't go anywhere. Project will be right back after the break.